Okay, this is the first of two test review podcasts for your Greek exam, which will be entirely multiple choice. We'll get some short essay questions when we go on to Rome, and you have a longer period to take the test. That won't be on a short day. Yes, there are many dates on this test. Don't get mad at me. Every test question you're getting is an actual AP test question from a past year. So save your wrath for the College Board. You may very well want to study the timeline at the end of chapters 4 and 5, which tie these dates to historical events. I actually think that's an easier way to remember them. I am not going to tell you exactly which dates you need to know, but I will drop some hints. The Archaic period is basically the 6th century. The Classical period is basically the 5th century. Remember how centuries work. You go up a number. We recently finished the 20th century, and all the dates are in the 1900s, right? The 5th century is the high point of Greece, from the defeat of the Persians in 478 BCE to Athens' defeat in the Peloponnesian War with Sparta in 404 BCE. Do not memorize those dates, but do memorize 5th century. That is the classical period. Now, the late classical and early Hellenistic periods are 4th century, and the rest of BCE is Hellenistic up to the defeat of the last Macedonian Empire at the Battle of Actium. Then it's Rome and another test. Just to go backwards a little, the geometric period is 8th century. Orientalizing 7th century, again, I've said Archaic is 6th period, and if it's before 1000, it is Proto-Greek. But you should remember that. Cycladic art is earlier than Minoan art, which is in turn earlier than Mycenaean art. Let me just say that I have not yet reviewed again the second multiple choice test, which I wrote a couple of weeks ago. If I find that there's something else in the date department that isn't on this slide, I doubt that there will be. I will alert you then. On to our first slide. Remember the guy getting strangled by snakes along with his 2 kids. This actually shows up as an image for several multiple choice image-based questions on 2 past AP tests. So there are a lot of questions about this work, actually in 2 separate parts of the test. Know the work. What story is it telling? Where did the artists get that story? Who made the work, the artist or artists? When was the sculpture made and in what period? Remember that those are different questions. One is a date question and one is one of these labels that we're assigning. What characteristics of this period does the work reveal? What's it made of? And then I want you to think about some of the characteristics of sculpture that it displays. All things that we talked about when we talked about this work, when we talked about this period, or when we've talked about sculpture in this course. While you're at it, make sure you understand the concept of negative or empty space, because one of the important developments we see in Greek sculpture is a greater and greater willingness to reach out into that negative space. You also need to remember the difference between additive and subtractive sculpture. So I've given you a lot there. You need to know your Acropolis buildings. There are 4 key buildings: the Parthenon, of course, the Propylaea, the Erechtheion, and the Temple of Athena Nike. It does not help that the last 3 look somewhat alike. So study the images in your book and figure out which ones these are. One of them should give you no trouble at all. The other is a little trickier, so I recommend that you check it out. These are the exact images that will appear on your test. The one on the bottom right is also the one that appears in your textbook. Hint, hint. Once you've identified your buildings, and yes, these will again be the images on the test, you will need to review your dates, your architectural orders, your basic architectural terms. When and why were these buildings constructed on the Acropolis? Who were their architects? Yes, there are hard names on the test as well. And nothing is worse than these architectural terms. You do need to know the difference between your architectural orders. It's easy if you pay attention to the capitals. The Ionian have those volutes. The Doric are simple. The Corinthian have those elaborate acanthus leaves. It's also good to recognize the triglyphs and metopes from the Doric order. I've given you a list here of terms that you should know. They don't absolutely all appear on the test, but a lot of them do. Study these, know them, be able to identify them from a drawing, but also to answer questions about them. And here again, I haven't yet reviewed the second multiple choice test. If there's something that isn't on this list, I will add it. And that'll give you a hint, won't it? Note that there is no picture of caryatids, but you do need to know what those are, and you know that by now, right? Okay. Yes, these images appear together. And by the way, the blown up image on the right is kind of a gift for me. I don't believe it actually appeared on the original AP exam. So the first question you should ask yourself is, what do these two works from very different eras have in common? What are the works? When were they made? What periods do they represent? And what story is each telling? We didn't spend a lot of time on the work on the right. We were racing our way through architecture and architectural sculpture. You might want to go back and, well, in all of these cases where there are images, I really recommend you reread those sections of the textbook. On the actual AP exam, they're not going to tell you the images in advance. So this is a real help. And I hope you are paying attention to this review podcast. Okay. It shouldn't be tough, I hope, to figure out why the College Board paired these two sculptures. If you don't know, now is the time to find out. As always, you want to know when and in what period they were made. What story are they telling? And note they're telling different stories. Who are they depicting? And in, again, what two different ways, what two different stories, where were they placed? That's important in this case. What artistic techniques do you observe? And I would pay particular attention to the clothing and to the overall way in which the figures are presented. Good luck. In my next review podcast, we're going to move on to the general multiple choice.